So here's a special report about what else is trending in the country right now.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Authorities in Dallas are being accused of trying to cover up Officer Amber Geiger's fatal shooting of an unarmed neighbor. The Dallas Police Department reportedly refused to release the audio of the 911 call, autopsy report, and other pertinent information to the case. Geiger is accused of entering her neighbor's apartment and fatally shooting the man, 26-year-old Botham Jean. Geiger was fired from Dallas PD and now faces a manslaughter charge. The family of a Brazilian motocross champion accused of domestic violence is threatening to sue the victim after she posted now viral photos of her battered face on social media. 25-year-old Eric Bretz, a champion in the Brazilian motocross championship circuit, is accused of assaulting his girlfriend, 22-year-old Melissa Gentz, in Tampa on September 23rd. Gentz alleges Bretz violently threw her to the floor, kicked her in the face, and choked her. Bretz now faces charges of domestic battery by strangulation and tampering with a witness. Investigators in Atlanta released surveillance footage showing a group of armed robbers who held up several gas stations in one night. The suspects used rubber surgical masks to cover their faces and held up several gas stations on the west side of Atlanta. The armed men almost met their match when a clerk ducked down and grabbed a gun at one station, but they fled before any shots were fired. All of the suspects remain at large. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Great reporting as always, Anthony. Go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of those stories. But let's talk about those series of gas station robberies right now. And joining me is my very special guest, Law and Crime trial analyst, Jonna Spilbor. John, it's great to see you. And you're not here on a Monday.
I know.
But you're welcoming me here on a weekday, on a Wednesday. So it's great to see you.
Always good to see you.
You know what's interesting? The first thing I saw when I saw that video, they immediately ran away when that gas station clerk took out the gun.
Yep.
Would you maybe be surprised to learn that maybe those guns they were carrying were not real?
That wouldn't surprise me at all. It wouldn't lessen the severity of this crime once they do get caught. You know, the interesting thing about this is, for me, Jesse, like, technology is so much smarter than criminals most of the time. So these guys go on a spree to rob a bunch of gas stations. How did they leave? Were they leaving on foot? I mean, you can obscure your face. You know, the camera's going to see. You can obscure your face. But they're going to leave such a trail that I don't think it's going to take long to figure out who they are.
You think they're going to be able to find them even though they're masked?
I think so, yes.
But how does that happen? I mean, what do we have to go with?
Because the cameras aren't just in the places that they robbed. Right? Cameras, you can't walk down any street without being on camera, I think, every 30 feet. And I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. So when they leave, they're going to be on camera at some other point, probably when they're dumb enough to take the masks off, and they'll figure out. We've got live witnesses, too. They'll figure out who these guys are.
Now, they were engaged in a pattern of robbing gas stations. Why do you think they picked those targets? And do you think after these surveillance footage is released, they're going to maybe hit other targets? I mean, other gas stations might be on alert now.
You know, yeah, they probably think gas stations are easy targets. Because if I owned one and somebody was working at a time it got robbed, I would say you give them everything that they want and just save yourself. It's not going to be worth it. The person who picked up the gun probably owns that place and is protecting it that way. But, you know, a lot of times you're just going to have an employee there, and they're trained, I think, to just give over the goods.
If they get captured, what could they be charged with?
Oh, my God. Armed robbery? Even if the guns are fake, they can get charged with armed robbery. And, you know, I think they'll be seeing the inside of a jail cell for a really long time.
Well, we will update our viewers if there's something that happens, if we find out who these individuals are. But again, you can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day, and perhaps we can learn a little bit more about this. So, Jonna, thank you. Stand by. We're going to switch gears right now, and we're going to talk about the James Colley case. Now, the most appropriate place to start is, of course, the beginning. So if you don't know, if you have no idea about this case, if you don't know anything about it, let's start with the prosecution's opening statement, where they really characterize who James Colley is and what they say he did. Take a look. Okay, let's break this down. Now, Jonna, you know what's weird is they go with that involuntary intoxication defense, and then they drop it and don't bring it up for the rest of trial.
Yeah.
What are they expecting the jury to think here?
You know, it's never a good idea to promise something in opening and then not deliver. Never a good idea. However, in this case, I will say, you know, based on what we know of the preliminary facts, that defense was never going to fly. Involuntary intoxication doesn't mean you voluntarily put things in your mouth and they had a combined effect that made you go crazy. It means that you didn't know. Somebody slips you a Mickey, or you took something that you thought was one thing, but it was, you thought it was an aspirin, but it turned out to be LSD. Like something like that, not Ambien combined with whatever else he was taking.
But isn't the argument that, hey, I didn't know this was going to be the effect of it? It's not like alcohol.
Yeah, well, no. You know why? Because read the label. Ambien is notorious. I've handled several DWI cases where the person was on Ambien, gets up in the middle of the night, has no idea that they're getting behind the wheel driving a car into somebody else's mailbox. It doesn't, the involuntary intoxication doesn't fly in those cases. Other defenses do, but not involuntary intoxication.
I've seen a case where they're trying to argue acne medication caused a person to kill another individual. So
really?
We'll always have to see which way these involuntary intoxication cases go. But when we come back, there's a lot more to dissect here in the James Colley case. We're just getting started. So thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. A lot to cover. How incredible is that? You're listening to the surviving victim talk about the events of that shooting. It's pretty incredible to listen to. Back here with Jonna Spilbor, though, and one of the things you and I had talked about was that, yeah, it doesn't really seem that the defense is arguing that he didn't do this. They're arguing that he did. They said he did it. But the idea of these domestic violence disputes, I mean, we knew that they were engaged in a divorce proceeding. There was an injunction filed against them earlier in that morning. This is just prone to happen more and more, right?
Well, I see it basically every day. In my practice, if you practice in family court or you handle divorces, you're going to see this quite a lot. And the scary part, Jesse, is the court can only do so much, right? And here, they issued her an order of protection. Well, think about it, folks. An order of protection is a piece of paper, right? It's not a shield. It's not. And if somebody wants to violate it, and like this man did, and come and kill people, it's not the be-all, end-all. You're not that safe. You might be a little bit safer. I wish she had taken additional precautions, because this was just a horrible tragedy.
I mean, we know that this was going to happen. We knew that he was violent, but something like this?
Yeah, terrible.
That's what's so crazy.
It's hard to predict, right?
Yeah, all right. Well, we have a lot to talk about with the James Colley case. Clearly, we're only at the beginning part of it, and we're going to talk more about what the defense's strategy is, because they adopted an involuntary intoxication defense and then dropped it. So we'll take a quick break. When we come back, a lot more to discuss here on Law and Crime. This is not just a witness. This is a surviving victim who narrowly escaped being shot. Now, we have video of a neighbor who captured her as well as Lamar Dauberly, the other person in the house, running away from the shots. This is amazing to see. It is so incredible. These are the moments when she basically was running for her life. I mean, that's what's happening here, Jonna. And when you look at this, a surviving victim testifying on the stand, what is that like for a jury to listen to?
It's great for a jury to listen to, because unlike most murder cases, right, you don't have anybody to give a blow-by-blow of what happened, because the victim is dead. But here, she can pretty much give a blow-by-blow from the time that he was spotted, I guess, in the yard to the time that she's hiding from him, basically, and he doesn't seem to care because he's going to shoot anyway. It's going to be very compelling testimony for the jury.
You know, when you're listening to the way that he went after each of these targets, you can understand why the prosecution moved forward with 2 counts of murder and a death penalty case.
Oh, absolutely. I think it sounds like it was very methodic, as opposed to somebody who just, let's say, went temporarily insane, even though it's not really a thing, and just started shooting everywhere. He had a target, and he wanted his estranged wife dead and didn't care who else got in the way. I think that's going to be clear throughout this trial.
In other words, there is a chance that if the facts of this were a little different, we could have maybe seen a manslaughter case. In other words, if his actions before, and we know that he was allegedly harassing his wife by, going to her house when she wasn't there, or things like that. If he just showed up and was angry and found out that she was seeing another man, would we have seen a manslaughter charge?
It would have been more likely that we would see a manslaughter charge, or maybe when we get to the end of this trial, they would have a manslaughter instruction. But think about this for a minute, Jesse. She got an order of protection. They call it a restraining order, injunction. It's all the same thing that day. Now, you just don't walk into a court and say, can I have one, please? And they hand it to you. You have to show that you are in some sort of danger and who's the person who's putting you in that danger. So there was evidence that day that he had been doing things that were dangerous to her situation. And then less than 24 hours later, she's dead.
Johnny, you made a great point. It's a piece of paper. It can't really protect
It's not bulletproof.
If somebody wants to break the law, that, and they brought that up too, to the jury, that this guy violated the law in multiple ways. He violated the rules of the court as well. Now, is that really, does the jury hold on to that too?
Well, I think it's going to be something for them to consider when they're trying to decide whether this was actually premeditated or whether it is something else. Because, I mean, look, the piece of paper really only gives you a partial peace of mind. Because had he violated the order of protection but didn't kill anybody, he'd be in jail. Because that's what happens. That's contempt. You go to jail for that. So she would have been more protected from him if only he had been stopped before he committed that actual murder.
And he didn't just show up. He opened fire. He went on a
He showed up with a gun.
Rampage. I mean, that's what's so incredible about this. And you talked about it. Unfortunately, these kinds of cases could always happen in these kinds of disputes with estranged lovers.
Very, very heated in family court and matrimonial court. So heated, you really have to take every precaution possible.
Well, the story doesn't end here, because when we come back, we're going to play you the testimony of the other surviving victim, Lamar Dobberly, the person that was in a romantic relationship with Amanda. We'll be right back. Okay, we're still recapping the James Colley case, and when we last left off, we were talking about the surviving victims of this shooting. We played you some of the testimony of Rachel Hendricks, and now we want to talk about Lamar Dobberly. So this video is actually surveillance footage from a neighbor, and you see Lamar Dobberly, that was him running away from the house. A short time after, you'll see Rachel Hendricks, who was right there at the shooting, run out as well. Now, Jonna, Lamar wasn't right there with the gunshots. He heard the gunshots and ran out. Rachel Hendricks actually got grazed by one of the bullets. But here's the thing. Rachel wasn't one of the intended targets. Lamar was. In fact, we learned that, that James Colley, the way the prosecution said it, was looking for him, was gunning for him, for lack of a better word.
Right. And that very well could be the case. I mean, look, when you're in the process, the throes of divorce, and your spouse starts seeing somebody else and you're a jealous person, this kind of rage can bubble up. And I think we see the product of that here. But, you know, what's your instinct going to tell you, Jesse? If you're in a house and you hear gunshots, do you go toward them or do you go away from them? I think it's almost natural that you would want to get away from the line of fire, literally.
I've seen criticism of him for running away and not checking on Amanda, but that's not fair because he was in a live, active shooting situation. But he did have a feeling at one point that he knew who was doing this.
Well, you know, it's not a big leap, to say the least, right? When you're in a relationship with somebody who's having a contentious dissolution of their relationship, you have to be on guard for this sort of thing. I mean, and I hate to say that, but it's true. I tell my clients all the time, if you get into another relationship before your divorce is final, keep quiet about it. Keep it under wraps. You don't have to post it on Facebook. You don't have to let the world know. Not doing so could save your life, right? Could save your life.
You know, what we learned is one of the things that might have set James Colley off, or the way the prosecution said it, is that there was a possibility there was a shirtless picture of Lamar Dobberly that he saw mowing Amanda's lawn, and that might have set him off. I mean, these things, and unfortunately, these are the things that might set somebody off.
Yeah, your brain isn't working properly, and the person that you've spent however many years with, who's mothered your children, is now in a relationship with somebody else who is mowing the lawn you used to mow, for example. That can really cause somebody not to go legally insane, but to be a little crazy.
And the defense kind of went that avenue, right? They were a little bit like, well, try to understand James Colley's perspective. He loved Amanda. He was
right.
But that's not a defense.
Well, it's not a defense to murder. It may be a defense to other things that are far less egregious than murder. But this defendant went to that home with a gun with the intent to kill at least one person and ended up killing two.
Let's talk about that right now, because we're going to play some of the testimony of Lamar Dobberly. Again, he was one of the intended victims of James Colley, or at least that's the way the state portrayed it. Let's hear what he had to say. That's Lamar Dobberly, one of the surviving victims, talking about when he heard those gunshots ringing out, he left. Now, I'm back here with Jonna Spilbor to talk about this when the defense is sitting there and listening to these surviving victims testifying,
Yeah.
are they just like, oh no, like what are we going to do with this?
You know, look, this is a sad and easily provable case. The defense had to have known that well before they sat at this trial and picked a jury. You know, I feel he said, but can I just go back to this boyfriend's testimony for a minute? He said something that struck me because he thought he was the intended target. So when he left at his first available opportunity, which I can't say I blame him, he might have thought that if he removed himself from the situation, nobody else was going to die. Like if he thought that this defendant was coming for him and couldn't find him, that he wasn't just going to start randomly shooting everybody.
Now here's the thing. I'll never blame anybody in this case. But the counter argument to that to be is he heard gunshots. So he knew something was about to happen. I mean, the argument could be that, is it really so believable that, oh, he's not there, that James Colley would just pick up and leave?
I think if this boyfriend headed toward the gunfire, we wouldn't have 2 victims, we would have 3.
So one of the most interesting things that I see in these kinds of cases is we can't forget that James Colley and Amanda had children together. That doesn't go through someone's mind before they inflict violence on the mother of their children or the father of their children?
Jesse, you would think, because you're speaking as a rational person who wouldn't want to have children with no parents, right? A dead mother and then a father who's, you know, if he's found guilty, is going to be sitting in the pokey for a long time.
Right.
Right? But in these types of situations, rationality goes out the window, obviously, right? This man probably had a job. He has 2 kids. He has a family. He was married. He had an order of protection against him, and yet still he decided to go to this house and just kill. I mean, so what? He had no ration. There's no ration. There's something snapped with this person. What's
also fascinating to listen to, it's not like he was alone. He was in a relationship himself, and of course I'm talking about James Colley. So you have 2 people who were in the middle of getting divorced, and they were both seeing other individuals basically trying to move on with their lives. But he wasn't moving on with his life, was he?
No, obviously not. You know, and some people, when they're in the throes of divorce, they get into relationships for all the wrong reasons. They don't want to be alone, for example, or they try to one-up. I have seen with my own 2 eyes people who do this on purpose to poke the bear that is their soon-to-be ex-spouse. Don't condone it. Never a good idea.
That's scary.
Yeah.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so we have a lot more to talk about with James Colley, including what the defense's case will ultimately be, and a little bit later on, we're going to let you know what the verdict is, and we'll continue to show this case, because we are rewinding one of the most interesting trials we have covered here on Law and Crime. So when we come back, we have a lot more to cover. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. Thank you, Anthony. Great reporting as always. And let's talk a little bit more about those gas station robberies again. I'm back here with Law and Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. So, Jonna, gas station robberies, it seems like a good target for robberies in the sense that it's different than a bank. It's easy access, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an easy mark. But if you're looking at me scrunch my face right now, I just noticed something on this video, Jesse, that I think will help solve this crime if cops go to social media. Do you see how this one person is he's moving his left arm over to his right shoulder as he's holding the gun up? They don't teach you that when you're in firearms safety class. Like, go on Facebook and find out how many people are posed like that. I think that'll help narrow. That's just a weird stand. You just don't do that.
I would imagine he's either doing it for 2 reasons, and I'm speculating. 1, to maybe cover his face more, or 2, to blowback of some kind. You know, if he were to fire the weapon.
There's no blowback like that. Like, there's no reason to do that unless, you know, that's a thing. Maybe he's in some sort of gang and that's a thing. I think for me, it's a clue.
I don't know. I mean, how do they ultimately track these guys down? I mean, their faces are covered. I would imagine it'd be difficult asking the witnesses, because if you ask a witness to a crime like that, they have trouble remembering what these people look like.
So I had a gun in my face a number of years ago. I was a victim of a crime, and it is extremely hard to identify the perpetrator. And I was, from me to you, away, but I was staring at the gun. So the face behind the gun, I couldn't tell you.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
That's, it was a long time ago, yeah.
Wow.
I'm still here.
So, yeah, I mean, you can imagine. And also, you have this gas station clerk who took it upon himself to take out the gun. That's a pretty bold thing to do.
That is a very bold and or stupid, depending on how you want to look at it. I'm going to guess that clerk may have had some sort of ownership stake, Because if you're just an employee, like I said, I would instruct you to hand over whatever they want.
What about the surgical mask? Seems like a strange thing to own. Do they go to different stores where people can buy surgical masks, or do they try to think of somebody as a connection to the medical community?
Or maybe they have a connection to the medical community. I don't think it's that hard to get your hands on surgical masks. I was in a nursing home the other day. They're for the taking as soon as you walk in. So they're not that hard to get.
What are you teaching people, Jonna, how to get surgical masks?
No, I'm not going to teach you how to do this. But look, there are other identifying characteristics here on that video. You know, their height, their weight. I don't know if they said anything, but there were witnesses in the gas station who might have heard their voice. There are going to be ways to figure out who they are. Well,
if we find any new information about this, we'll make sure to let our viewers know. And again, go to Law&Crime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. We're going to switch gears and talk about James Colley, though. And where we want to go is we're going to go back to the prosecution's opening statement. But this time, they're going to talk about the events leading up to the shooting, including when they say James Colley broke into Amanda's house. Take a look. Okay, now we're getting an idea of the James Colley timeline. The day before the shooting, he tries calling Amanda multiple times, can't get a hold of her. That night, as we just heard, he snuck into her house, found all these sex toys, got enraged, called Mike Dickens, who tried to calm him down. The next morning, he goes to court, gets the order against him, and you know what happens later on in the day is he opens fire against Amanda and Lindy Dobbins. Now, that is quite some timeline, Jonna. What does that tell you from an attorney perspective?
It's clearly an escalation, Jesse. I mean, it just started to bubble, 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 bubble. And, you know, it culminates with this order of protection earlier that day, which was really supposed to be a spike strip so that he couldn't escalate further, and it didn't do a darn thing.
Let's listen to the defense's opening statement where they kind of address some of that break-in. Okay, let's see how the defense is doing right there. I'm back here with Law&Crime trial analyst Jonna Spilbor. So the defense is trying to explain away him breaking in, that he, you know, he's a good father, that he was upset with what he found with these sex toys, sees another man in Amanda's life. Jury, have some empathy for James Colley. How do you think he did?
Not doing a great job. It just doesn't. It doesn't add up, and it's not a sufficient excuse. Look, you can be a great father, and there are many great fathers out there who are estranged or divorced from their spouses. They don't break in to a home that's not theirs. I am sure, even though I didn't handle their divorce, that she had exclusive use and occupancy of that home, meaning he's not allowed to go there without permission, let alone go there in the middle of the night. Under the auspice of what? That he was concerned for his children's well-being? He never should have found those sex toys because he never should have been in that house. So the reason why he went berserk never should have happened in the first place. I don't see where this defense is going to sway the jury that, oh, you know what? Let's give him a pass. He only killed 2 people.
But I'm sure there are people on the jury who were in relationships, and are you looking for people that were in relationships and maybe had bad relationships or were divorced? And is that the kind of jury that you're looking for, people that have been separated or have been divorced, when they can kind of relate to what happened here?
You know, that's an interesting point, but I'll say this. If the person on that jury has gone through a bitter divorce or a bitter breakup, here's what we know for sure. That person didn't kill anyone, because if they did, they wouldn't be sitting on that jury. So those people might not do the defense any favors, because they could say, I went through it too, and I didn't shoot anybody.
But is that what the defense is looking for? Do they actually ask those questions of potential jurors?
You know, they probably want jurors who can be empathetic, if not sympathetic. I will give them that much, but he went over the edge. James Colley went completely over the edge.
The idea of saying that, you know, he sees this other guy in his life, he sees these sex toys. I mean, they really wanted to get graphic there. They really want it to be a shock value, don't they?
You know, I think that's what this defense is going for. But listen, Jesse, if he came home from work and they were still married and he finds sex toys and some sort of affair evidence, okay, you go nuts. You're getting divorced. You don't live together. The inevitable is going to happen. You have no right to be that angry. Or if you have a right to be angry, you don't have a right to kill anybody over it.
When we come back, we're going to talk more about other people that were in their lives, and perhaps is there something that could have been avoided? And it's always a tough question, because who would have known this would have actually happened? But we'll talk about other people in their lives, and also back with Lamar Daberly, one of the surviving victims. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we're talking about this case, and this is a really important moment. You're talking about the break-in. But that's not the only thing that we're talking about. You know, I'm back here with Jonna Spilbor, and there were a lot of people in the lives of Amanda Colley and James Colley, and we're about to play some testimony from one individual in particular, but I hate to say this. Was there any way that this could have been prevented? Did people have an understanding of who James Colley was? They clearly felt that there was a danger here, and they knew what they said at one point to him: you have to calm down, don't do anything crazy, is even what his father said. Do you think that's going through their minds?
You know, there might be some of that. There might be some people in his life who thinks that maybe they could have done more to prevent this. Because, you know, look, I don't know if he was seeing a therapist. He probably would have benefited from one. But compare and contrast here, Jesse. He breaks into the house the day before. His soon-to-be ex-wife does the right thing. She goes to court. She gets an order of protection. Boom, boom. She doesn't waste any time, right? Do not pass go, do not collect $200. What does he do? He breaks in again the following day and kills people. I mean, clearly she's trying to do the right thing. He was so off track that I don't know if there was going to be any reining him in at that point. And it's a shame. I think only police intervention could have helped this before he broke into the house.
Do you think there needs to be a new system where if somebody gets an order on somebody, maybe in the first 24 hours, 48 hours, there should be a police detail assigned, at least one officer?
Do we have the resources to do that? Do you know how many cases are in and out of family court, Jesse? I mean, it's really hard. Unless can you get a personal bodyguard? I mean, if you think somebody is such a threat, should there be a way that they can calm down for 24 hours in a jail cell? I mean, that's a whole lot of risk to one's liberty based on not a whole lot of evidence, because when you get an order of protection initially, there's not a full-blown hearing.
Right.
You're making an application.
Yeah, I know. We're all speculating here about how this might have been prevented. Let's play the testimony, though, of a different witness. This is Mike Pickens, who is a friend of James Colley and tried to calm him down after James went into Amanda's house and discovered all these items. Let's find out. All right, that was Mike Pickens trying to calm down James Colley after finding all these materials at Amanda's house. Now, I'm back here with Jonna Spilbor. This is a guy who was a friend of the defendant, and yet he's providing very credible testimony, in my opinion, about what the state of affairs was for James Colley, that he was an angry guy. He was angry that day.
He's helping spell that out for the jury. But the thing that's kind of bothering me about his testimony is he's almost treating it like it was no big deal. In fact, I think that's what he said to the defendant, like, hey, you know, relax, chill out. This is no big deal. But clearly it was a big deal. And so is this friend so disconnected that he didn't realize that? Or is he toning down his testimony because he just doesn't want to feel responsibility? I'm not sure. Does
it help James Colley's case at all whether or not people didn't really think that he would do this, that it was surprising? Or would it hurt it the opposite way? They're like, oh my gosh, we knew what a danger he was.
I think it's probably better for James Colley if the jury thinks that he truly, truly snapped. But, you know, based on the testimony that we've heard thus far, it's clearly not just an out-of-the-blue snap. I mean, that's sort of that's what a snap is, out of the blue. But it really is this build. James Colley was looking for reasons to be angry. He was looking. You don't break into your ex-wife's house unless you're looking for a reason to be ticked off. And he found him. And then he acted on it.
So this is a death penalty case. We're not going to let our viewers know exactly what the verdict is, but if it should be a guilty verdict and this goes to a guilt phase, a sentencing phase, is this the kind of case that's prone for death penalty eligibility? I mean, is this really where a jury can find the death penalty?
On the one hand, I want to say yes, because you have multiple victims. You have two victims, one of whom had nothing to do with anything. She's collateral damage. She was an innocent bystander. So yes, you could say that's a great case for the death penalty. On the other hand, if you want to have a little empathy for this guy and think that he snapped, and he does have two children, maybe you let him live. So to me, right now it's 50-50.
Yeah, that's a big point, because he shares kids, but you mentioned it before. He knew he was killing the mother of his children. So how much sympathy can we really have?
Not a whole lot, probably.
But this is so many victims in this case. It's not just Amanda Colley or Lindsay Dobbins, it's the kids as well.
The kids as well, and not to mention, I mean, the people who lived are still victimized too. They were in a house with gunfire, afraid for their own lives.
Yeah, so you saw Lamar Dabble, you saw Rachel Hendricks testifying, you saw video of them running out of the house. Who knows what kind of psychological trauma that has had upon them, being the surviving victims. But when we come back, we're going to talk more about the crime scene, and we're going to get a real inside look from investigators. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. Okay, we're learning a little bit more about the crime scene. And Jonna, one of the most miraculous things about this whole case is he could have escaped. He drove away. He was in Virginia when he was picked up. I mean, the chances that if he was in another state, if somebody commits a crime and they travel multiple states, what's the likelihood that they could ever be found in connection with it?
Well, look at it this way. This guy had 2 kids, right? I mean, so he was going to run, but he wasn't going to be able to hide, honestly. And especially since we had 2 living witnesses, like we were going to put this together. It wasn't going to be a whodunit for very long, and it wasn't. So they would have found him, and then they would have extradited him, and that would have been the name of that tune.
Yeah, well, he was arrested. Now, you're listening to the testimony of Sean Volmar, who's the crime scene technician. Let's play a little bit about when it was discovered, when Amanda's body was ultimately discovered. Okay, so now we have just learned how the bodies of the 2 victims were ultimately discovered by investigators. But, Jonna, I'm curious from your perspective, as we listen to the details of the shooting and the crime scene itself, how does this shooting rank up to other kinds of domestic violence, assaults or disputes or murders that you've seen? How does it measure up to other ones that you've seen?
I think, in my opinion, this one is less spontaneous. And what I mean by that is it's not a situation where, 2 spouses are sitting at the kitchen table and they have an argument, and then, boom, the next thing we know, somebody's getting physically hurt. This was much more planned, Jesse, and much more methodical. And even though this was a crazy crime scene in that he's basically storming this house, shooting through closets, not knowing really who his targets were, he had so many moments that he could have stepped back. So many moments that he didn't have to do what he did, and he didn't take advantage of any of them.
So what is the defense to do here? I mean, they had an idea. They had a goal. Let's go with involuntary intoxication, but they dropped it. Why would they drop it in the middle of the trial?
I mean, that's an amazing question to me. Well, I can say this. Based on what we know of the facts, involuntary intoxication was never going to be a viable defense. As I mentioned earlier, just because he was on Ambien and just because he doesn't remember aiming, just because you can't remember doing an event doesn't mean that your intoxication, whether it's drugs, alcohol, what have you, was involuntarily ingested. So
then I guess the question, I know we only have like 20 seconds or so, but the question is, what other defense could they have gone with?
This could be probably one of the most indefensible cases that we've seen thus far, unless he's going to go with a mental state defense, which might not eliminate. I don't think he's going to walk free, but it could lower the severity from murder, say, to manslaughter or something else.
Okay, we'll discuss more of that, and we'll ultimately reveal the verdict and what happens to James Colley a little bit later in the program. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the medical examiner and the injuries sustained by these victims. So stay tuned here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back. That is really compelling testimony right there. I'm back here with Jonna Spilbor. So what we're seem to be indicating is Amanda was trying to protect herself. That doesn't seem like a struggle or anything like that.
Yeah, obviously trying to protect herself. And again, it was another moment where this defendant had an opportunity to stand down and didn't.
Why is he covering his ears? Has this become too emotional? Is he starting to realize what happened? What can you make of that?
You know what? I guess you have to, fortunately, we don't know what it's like to go off on some shooting rampage, but I imagine at this point in this man's life, he probably very much regrets what he did. He took the life of his children's mother. He took the innocent life of a friend. You got to assume that if he did snap, he's back down to reality, and he can't believe what he did. Not going to negate his guilt, but that's what he's feeling.
Jonna, thank you so much for coming on. It was great having you as always.
See you soon.
See you soon. All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more discussion from the medical examiner. Stay tuned.